Is your child still struggling in school despite attending tutoring and receiving extra support? Are you at a loss with how to help them? Well, as an English teacher, I've seen this happen time and time again when a student will try their hardest and still struggle to demonstrate what they've learned. Here's the thing, it doesn't have to be this way. In this video, we'll discuss special education services and how this can help address some of these issues. You'll learn what special education is and if it's time to refer your child for special education services. So I started in education as a special education co-teacher where I worked in tandem with a general education teacher and I provided special education supports in the inclusion classroom environment. Eventually, I transitioned over into the general education side and I became an English teacher. This is where I started to see gaps. I had one student in particular who had regular classroom attendance. He came to school almost every day. He attended tutoring sessions. He received extra support. He even sat next to me some days for one-on-one attention. And when it was time to demonstrate what he learned through an assignment or a test, he simply couldn't. And the kicker was that he exceeded expectations in majority of his other classrooms. So as a teacher, I started to wonder what's going on in my class. And I began to survey the way I taught. I began to survey my instructions to see if the issue was me. But over time, we realized that that wasn't the issue. And I spoke to his mom about it. And she did see some things that he was struggling with at home when it was time to do English homework. So we agreed to start the referral process for her child. After testing and evaluation, we discovered that her son did have a specific learning disability in basic reading and reading comprehension. And that's when we had the big aha moment. We finally learned what was causing him to struggle so bad in my English class. And the questions that we had found its answers. So the problem is that society teaches us that students should be able to demonstrate their learning in the same way. And this simply isn't the case. All students do not learn the same way, and they also don't demonstrate their learning in the same way. And sometimes it's a result of a disability that hasn't been diagnosed. The problem lies with when a student is underperforming, we tend to assume that something is going on with the child. We think that maybe they're not working hard enough, or maybe they're just being lazy. But sometimes the case is something else. So what exactly is special education? Special education is a service and not a place. So that's to say that there's not a classroom that you just send students to all the time, or it's not a separate school or a facility that students have to go to all the time. It is a service that is provided, and it's provided based on the needs of the student. Under TEA and the IDEA laws, there are 14 qualifying disabilities that a student must meet to receive special education services. This means that when a child qualifies under the 14 disabilities, one of the 14, a team of educators, parents, service providers, administration, sometimes nurses even, will collectively come together and assess the student to see what they need to perform at their best in the classroom environment, and they will create an educational plan. We like to call this an individualized education plan, or IEP for short. For example, you may have a child that's dyslexic or have dyslexia. That student will be assessed, and the teachers and dyslexia specialists and the educational diagnostician will evaluate the child and see what do they need to perform their best in the classroom. And they'll create a plan that allows for the student to maybe have extra time on assignments. They may have text to speech for lengthy reading text. They may have a pull-out session with a co-teacher that will read assignments to them or direct them to specific information. The accommodations and supports vary based on the needs of the child, but it's all to help support the child in the classroom. Earlier, I mentioned the student that I had that struggled in English that was later diagnosed with a specific learning disability. Once he was diagnosed, he had to eventually change from my classroom to another teacher's classroom. And in that teacher's classroom, he was provided support by a special education professional. She would come to the classroom a couple of times a week and provide extra help to the student. And when she wasn't in the classroom, he received accommodations. And over time, the teacher saw him begin to soar. It wasn't that he was lazy or that he wasn't trying hard enough. It was that he had a disability and he just needed extra help. What's most important is that we saw his confidence change and shoot through the roof. He struggled before because he thought, well, maybe I'm just dumb. And he finally learned that he wasn't dumb, that he just needed extra help. So instead of jumping to conclusions when a student is underperforming, maybe we should start to consider what the student is actually doing first. Let's assess their input. Are they attending school regularly? Are they putting in extra time going to tutoring sessions? Are they putting in time to get extra support from teachers? Are they doing their homework? What are they putting in? And then we can assess what the output looks like and draw a comparison, because it's not always the case that a student isn't doing enough. Sometimes they're doing the best that they can and they're still coming up short, and special education services may be the thing that they need. So you may be wondering, what do I do to get this process started? There are 3 things that I want you to consider if you're thinking about referring your child for special education services. First, I want you to consider talking to your child. Your child has the unique opportunity to explain things from their perspective. At the end of the day, the entire educational plan is to support the student. So why not go to the source when we're trying to figure out what's going on? Ask them what they're experiencing in the classroom. Ask them if they're distracted or if they're sitting with friends, or maybe there's something else that we need to factor into the conversation. But the best person to ask first is your child. Second, I believe you should speak to the child's teacher. Ask the teacher what are their experiences with the student. Set up a parent-teacher conference and come with a list of questions and concerns that may address what your student may be struggling with. The teacher has great insight about their participation in class. They should provide some work samples, some examples of what your student is able to do and what they're not able to do. And maybe that will help you come to a conclusion of if you should refer them for special education services. And last, but also important, I want you to talk to other stakeholders or family members. If you have a significant other, of course, don't include them or disclude them from the conversation. Make sure that they're a part of the conversation. Make sure that they are involved and understand what the special education process is and why you're considering it. You don't want to take what they say and draw a conclusion and say, okay, XYZ said this, so now we for sure want to refer our child. But I am saying that you want to consider the collective of information and then make an assessment and an informed decision. So I'm curious, comment below if you were a part of special education, if you're comfortable speaking on that, or if you've considered it before. Let me know if any of this resonates with you in the comment section. Now, I want to provide you with 3 takeaways to remember. Special education is not a place, it's a service. Remember that it is a service that can be provided to your child in the general education setting. Maybe it's in a resource room. Maybe it's a pull-out. It could be a different environment, but remember the service that is being provided, not the place that the service is provided in. Second, before I referred to the IEP, the educational plan, remember that it is a plan and it has to be based on an educational need. So you may have a child that's on the swim team and they're struggling to win, or they're struggling to be put into the relays or the game, whatever it's called. You can't come to the school and say, oh, well, my child needs extra support swimming on the swim team and I want them to have special education services. Unfortunately, swim is not an educational need. So remember that whatever the cause is for the referral, it has to be based on an educational need. And lastly, remember that this all is based on federal and state laws. The IDEA Act is an act that provides special education supports to students in school. So Because the law is involved, there are certain things that we can do and certain things that we can't do. There are certain timelines that we must adhere to and certain deadlines that we must adhere to. So that's something to keep in mind. It is a process. It's not an overnight thing, and it requires a lot of patience. Now, you may have a grasp on if you should refer your child for special education services, or you might be thinking about it. But you still might have a lot of questions like, once I refer them, what happens next? So I want you to check out my next video where I'll explain the entire special education process from beginning to end. Thanks for watching.